the American West. We picture it like a promise, infinite horizon, a place where a man could reinvent himself from nothing, where the slate was wiped clean and only the strong survived. We call it the Great Unknown, a canvas for the bold, a testing ground for the worthy. We put it in paintings and dime novels and songs. We gave it golden light and noble silhouettes on horseback against a burning sky. But this is a lie, a carefully constructed, deeply comforting lie. For the men who first pushed beyond the Missouri River, the scouts who walked into countries with no names on any map, who drank from rivers that no white man had ever touched, who slept on ground that had never seen a tent. It was not a promise, it was a sentence. It was a place of savage cold and merciless distance, of weeks without food and months without a friendly face. Here, a single error, a broken compass, a spooked horse, a wrong turn, a moment of inattention. It was not a setback, it was a burial. We love the myth of the frontier scout, fearless, sharp-eyed, reading the land like a book, always one step ahead of danger, always knowing which way was north. The reality was something else entirely. It was a man gaunt with hunger, his boots held together with strips of rawhide, his eyes always moving, always scanning the tree line. A man who slept with one hand on his rifle, who drank muddy water and called it luck, who measured a good day not by what he discovered, but by the simple, brutal fact that he was still breathing when the sun went down. The wilderness did not reward their bravery. It didn't notice it. The land was not a challenge to be overcome. It was a sentence, a patient, indifferent force that collected men like unpaid debts. It killed with cold that crept into the bones overnight and never left. It killed with thirst so profound that men dug in dry creek beds with their bare hands. It killed with infection, with a single arrow from a dark tree line, with bad water and bad luck and the slow, grinding, suffocating weight of absolute solitude. These men did not ride off into sunsets. They bled out in creek beds with no one to hold their hand. They froze face down in the snow, their fingers black, their last breath a white cloud that disappeared into air that didn't care. They drowned in rivers with no names. They were swallowed by a continent that never knew they were there. We remember their daring journeys. We remember the miles and the maps and the moments of impossible courage. This is the story of how those journeys ended, from the heart of the wilderness, where survival meets skill. This is bushcraft lore, the knowledge to build, wisdom to thrive. Meriwether Lewis was the architect of everything that came after. Without Lewis, there is no Coulter, no Smith, no Glass, no Mountain Man era at all. He and Clark opened the door to the American West, and every trapper, every scout, every settler who came after walked through it without knowing his name. He was a captain, a naturalist, a man of rare and disciplined intelligence. He cataloged hundreds of species that no European had ever described. He crossed a continent and came back alive with journals full of the most important geographical information in American history. He shook hands with dozens of tribal leaders. He smoked pipes in lodges beside men who had never seen a white face before his. He came home a national hero. President Jefferson called him the greatest pathfinder the Republic had ever produced. The newspapers couldn't get enough of him. He was appointed governor of Louisiana Territory. He had everything. And then, 3 years after returning from the most successful expedition in American history, he was dead at 35. In October of 1809, Lewis was traveling the Natchez Trace in Tennessee, heading to Washington to deal with disputed government accounts. He was troubled. He was drinking more than he should. He had struggled since coming back from the frontier, unable to settle into the slow, bureaucratic rhythms of civilized life. He stopped for the night at a small roadside inn called Grinder's Stand. In the early hours of the morning, shots were fired. The innkeeper's wife heard them. heard him staggering on the porch in the dark, talking to himself, begging for water, begging someone to come. By morning, Meriwether Lewis was dead on the floor of a log cabin. He had gunshot wounds to the head and chest. The official verdict was suicide. His friends, including William Clark himself, never believed it. They said Lewis had been robbed, that the wounds told a different story, that a man with his training, his instincts, his survival-honed mind did not shoot himself twice. The debate has never been settled. It may never be. His grave sits on the Natchez Trace in Tennessee. It is a quiet, unremarkable place off a two-lane highway. There is a broken column placed there on purpose, a monument to a life cut short before its time. Whether he was murdered in the dark or finally broke beneath the invisible weight of what he had seen and done and could no longer reconcile, the man who opened the American West died alone in the night on a dirt road in Tennessee, far from the mountains that had given his life its only real meaning. He was never given the burial and glory that he had earned. The name alone tells you something about the kind of man the frontier produced. Johnston was not a man of half measures, and he was not a man of subtlety. He came west in the 1840s after deserting the Navy and built a life in the wild country of Wyoming and Montana, trapping, hunting, scouting along the Powder River and into the heart of Crow and Sioux territory. He was enormous, well over 6 feet and broad through the chest and shoulders, with hands so large they wrapped around a rifle stock like it was a toy. He was quiet and deliberate in the way that genuinely dangerous men often are, but what carved his name into the legend of the frontier was not his size or his skill. It was a war he started and finished entirely alone. In 1847, a Crow raiding party came to his cabin while he was away hunting. They found his young wife, who was pregnant with their first child. They killed her. Johnston came home to ashes and silence and a grief so total it cured him of fear entirely. He declared war on the entire Crow nation, not a skirmish, not a raid in retaliation, a sustained, deliberate personal war that lasted 12 years. Every warrior the Crows sent to find him, he found first. According to the legend that grew around him, he ate the liver of every man he killed. It was not madness for its own sake. To the Crow, the liver was the seat of a warrior's courage. He was sending a message written in their own spiritual language. He killed more than 20 Crow warriors over those 12 years. And then something happened that no one could have predicted. The Crow adopted him. They had fought him long enough to know what he was, and they respected it too profoundly to keep fighting it. They named him Dapiek Absaroka, Crow Killer. He became one of them. He went on to scout for the army, kept an uneasy peace where he could manage it, and lived long enough to become a walking relic of an age that was already being buried under railroads and barbed wire. Johnston died in January 1900 in a soldier's home in Los Angeles. He was old and sick, a lung ailment grinding him down in a white-walled room surrounded by strangers, 1,000 miles from the mountain country that had made him everything he was. He died in a hospital bed which would have struck him as perhaps the strangest fate of all. There was a burial and a headstone, but decades later, people who remembered what he had been petitioned to have him moved home. In 1974, his remains were reburied in Cody, Wyoming, under the kind of wide-open mountain sky that had defined his entire life. Even in death, the land reached out and claimed him back. James Ohio Patty was 20 years old when he walked into the American Southwest with his father, Sylvester, and a small company of trappers. It was 1824, and almost no American had ever seen what they were about to see. They were among the first to trap the Gila River, to lay eyes on the inner canyons of the Colorado, to push into territory that was still nominally under Mexican authority and deeply, hostilely inhabited. Patty was young and reckless and built for punishment. He survived Apache raids that killed men around him. He survived desert crossings so brutal they killed every pack animal in the party, leaving the men to carry what they could and abandon the rest. He watched his father, Sylvester, die of fever in a California jail cell, having been arrested by Mexican authorities who suspected the Patties of being American spies. James, Ohio. Patty dug the grave himself in the hard prison yard dirt with his bare hands and whatever tool they gave him. He said nothing about it in his journal. There was nothing to say. He was eventually released, eventually made it back east, and eventually wrote a book about everything he had survived. It was a sensation. People in the eastern cities devoured it in a single sitting. He was famous for one bright, brief moment, a curiosity in parlors and coffee houses, the young man who had seen the wild interior of the continent and lived. And then he went back. The California gold rush of 1849 pulled him west again. He was in his mid-40s by then, which on the frontier made him ancient, a man whose joints had been wrecked by years of cold water and hard ground. The gold rush was not kind to old men. It was a chaos of 100,000 souls pouring into a place that couldn't hold them, and Patty disappeared into it like a stone dropping into deep water. There is no record of where he died or when. No grave marker, no date, no witness who wrote it down. The man who survived the worst the Southwest could produce, who crossed the Mojave on foot, who buried his father in a foreign jail, who wrote it all down so that others could understand what was really out there, simply ceased. The desert had let him go once. The second time, it kept him. John C. Fremont himself survived everything. He was charmed, politically connected, wealthy in reputation, married to a powerful man's daughter. They called him the Pathfinder. He ran for president. He lived to be 77, but the men around him, the real men, the ones who did the actual reading of the land and the actual dying in the snow, were not charmed. They were tools. They were picked up and used and put down by a man who understood fame far better than he understood the wilderness. In the winter of 1848, Fremont drove his fourth expedition directly into the San Juan Mountains of Colorado in December, with an almost incomprehensible arrogance. His hired guide, the legendary old Bill Williams, who had lived in those mountains for decades, who spoke the languages of the people who called those peaks home, begged him to stop. The Ute people said it was impassable in winter and they had lived there for generations. Fremont pushed on anyway because he needed to prove a route and because no one had ever told him no and made it stick. The storm that hit them was the kind of storm that the mountains keep in reserve for people who underestimate them. The snow came sideways and didn't stop. Men could not see 2 feet in front of their faces. The horses died first, standing up, freezing solid where they stood. Then the mules. The men began to starve in earnest, then to freeze, then to make the kind of desperate decisions that haunt the ones who survive. A man named Henry King was part of a relief party sent back down the mountain to find help. He and 3 companions pushed through chest-deep snow for days with nothing to eat, their bodies consuming themselves to keep moving. King collapsed somewhere on a high ridge and could not get up again. His companions made the calculation that saving themselves was the only thing left to do. They left him. He died sitting upright against a pine tree, his back against the bark, staring at a mountain that didn't notice him. He was a skilled and experienced man of the frontier. He was competent and tough and had no business dying on that ridge. He died because a famous man needed to prove a point to people who would never set foot in those mountains. Fremont went on to run for president of the United States. Henry King's name is a footnote in a footnote. Toussaint Charbonneau is remembered, when he is remembered at all, only as the husband of Sacagawea, a supporting character in someone else's legend. He was a French-Canadian fur trapper living among the Hidatsa people when Lewis and Clark wintered near their village in 1804. He spoke Hidatsa and French. He was hired as an interpreter. He was, by almost every account left behind, a mediocre woodsman and a deeply frustrating man to travel with. He fell out of canoes. He panicked in storms and had to be physically restrained from capsizing the boats. He was disorganized, slow, and demanding. Meriwether Lewis wrote about him in the journals with a barely concealed contempt that is almost funny to read 200 years later. He was not the hero of the story. He was not even a particularly good supporting character, but he survived. He outlived almost everyone connected to that expedition. He kept working the frontier long after the mountain man era had peaked and faded, interpreting for the U.S. government, working for fur trading companies, traveling the upper Missouri well into old age. He was still crossing rivers and sleeping on hard ground at an age when most men of his era were long dead and buried. Charbonneau died in 1843. He was somewhere between 75 and 80 years old, which on the frontier was not merely old age, it was a kind of defiance. Some accounts say he died in a fall. Others say he simply faded, the body finally collecting what the wilderness had been unable to take by force. He died somewhere along the upper Missouri, probably near Fort Berthold, in the country he had spent his entire adult life crossing. No grave was marked, no monument was raised, no newspaper printed a memorial. The man who had stood at the elbow of Lewis and Clark and watched the door to the west swing open for the first time, who outlasted men younger and stronger and more celebrated in every direction, dissolved quietly into the same country that had produced him. The frontier's least impressive man turned out to be its most durable. In the end, stubbornness alone was its own particular genius. These endings were not what the stories promised. They never are. Meriwether Lewis, the greatest pathfinder his nation had ever produced, died alone in the dark on a Tennessee road, shot and possibly murdered and certainly broken by a peace he never figured out how to live in. John Johnston, the man who declared war on an entire nation and earned their brotherhood, died wheezing in a Los Angeles soldier's home, staring at a ceiling instead of a sky. James Ohio Patty, who crossed the Mojave on foot and buried his father in a foreign jail yard, walked into the gold rush and was simply never seen again. Henry King froze to death sitting upright against a pine tree because a famous man needed to prove something to people who would never come anywhere near those mountains. And Toussaint Charbonneau, the man everyone dismissed, the man no one wrote poems about or named rivers after, outlasted them all and still died in the mud without a stone to mark the spot. There are no monuments where most of these men fell. The ridge where Henry King sat down for the last time is just rock and snow and wind. The road where Lewis died is just asphalt now. The rivers Patty crossed are just water, indifferent and cold, the same as they always were. Their legends, where they have legends at all, were built from distance and time and the natural human hunger for stories with clean edges. But the truth is in the cold and the sand and the silence that followed each of them into the ground. They did not tame the West. They were ground down by it, used up by it, worn through by it like cloth on stone. They were the instruments the continent played once and then set aside. The land that made them famous was the same land that erased them, and it did both without effort and without memory. In the end, it always was. These are the men who mapped the edges of a continent, and in return received unmarked ground and forgotten names, and the long, indifferent silence of a wilderness that was there before them and is still there now. The wilderness took everything. It always does.